Okay, well, now to continue our discussion about, the personal recession, isn't it, really? As we were saying, Chairman of Growth Commission, Shanker Singham, is with us. Thank you very much indeed, Shanker. As we were pointing out, yes, a tiny little bit of growth overall in the last quarter, but we don't feel any richer.
No, that's right. Essentially, GDP has increased by 0.1%, but the Prime Minister has made it very clear that he wants to increase household income, which is best proxied by GDP per capita, as you noted in your segment. That has fallen by 0.1% in the last quarter. I think that there's some significant issues here. One is the reason that you've got GDP going up by 0.1% and GDP per capita going down by 0.1% is almost entirely the population increase. We're adding 1 million a year to the population. Most of that, almost all of that, is immigration. And if you drill down underneath the figures, you see that private sector activity has actually declined even under the GDP 0.1% increase. The actual private sector contribution to that is down.
That is crucial, Shanker, because that's the bit that pays for the public sector. Yeah. So the bit that generates the tax is actually smaller, and the bit that eats up the tax and the borrowing, that's the only bit that's growing.
Yes, exactly. So what your viewers sort of should understand about the GDP number is it does include government spending. So it's not just private activity, it's also government spending. And GDP per capita also includes government spending. So government spending is up. In the Growth Commission, we've now done 3 budgets for the UK. Our comment, we think you could, if you do the right things, increase GDP per capita of the UK by about 26% over the next 20 years, so a little bit more than 1% over the trend line. But that requires a lot of regulatory reform. It requires a lot of tax reform. Some serious things that need to be done. After the autumn budget, we assumed that the government would succeed on their planning reform, which is a big driver of growth. And all the other things, even with the planning reform, contributed to what we felt was going to be about a -8% GDP per capita change over the next 20 years. It's interesting that the last 2 quarters, the last half year, is almost exactly on that track.
Oh, great. Shanker, properly depressing if that's our trajectory. So we're just going to be feeling poorer and poorer if things don't radically change. We've got this spending review. We know Rachel Reeves is very worried about the lack of money. We're hearing that all this headroom has disappeared. We're hearing sort of rumours that potentially Rachel Reeves could decide to go after things like cash ISAs. We're at that point now. Shanker, where does she go from here?
Well, I think you're going to see an emergency, if you don't want to call it a budget, an emergency statement of some kind towards the end of March. And what we would recommend that the Chancellor do is have a long, hard look at some of the growth-killing measures in the last budget, particularly the tax increases, particularly things like frankly, Great British Energy, Great British Nuclear. These are state-supported organisations that are going to cut private sector contribution to the economy. Full planning reform, not just tweaking the edges of planning reform. So they're going to have to look at the role of statutory consultees. They're going to have to look at judicial review. They're going to have to look at zonal planning. So massive changes. Almost a repeal of the Town and Country Planning Act is really what is required on an emergency basis. And I think also all the subsidies that are being paid for renewable energy in pursuit of net zero targets, all of that will have to be looked at. And I think I still think you can generate increased growth in the UK. We're going to have to look, if the president of the US, Donald Trump, does impose tariffs beyond the steel and aluminium tariffs we've just seen, if he imposes those generally across the board, that is going to be a further hit to the UK economy. And I expect that Trump is quite predisposed to offer a trade deal of some kind to the UK, which I would strongly urge the government to take up, because I think that's what will generate, the conditions for the kind of regulatory reform that frankly we need to see.
Yeah, that would be the big booster. But frankly, would this government accept chicken that's been washed in chlorine in our shops?
I mean, if Shanker Singham, thank you very much.
Personally, I love American chicken, but
they wouldn't have to. We've already signed the chapter that the Americans would put on the table in that area of SPS.
Oh, really?
It's already been ported over from the CPTPP, which we've just signed. And all it will say is that we commit to sound science in our agricultural regulations and basically much as what the WTO says.
That's really, really interesting. Well, Shanker Singham, but perhaps this US-UK trade deal isn't a pipe dream after all. But Chairman of the Growth Commission, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.